The final session we have before our morning break is a panel discussion examining the impact of the Taskforce recommendations to providers. I know this will be an interesting session for all of us. And another opportunity for us to be able to get our QR code scanned as well, to be able to win those fabulous prizes. Our moderator for this session is Samantha Edmonds. Samantha is the Director of Policy and Systemic Advocacy. She has extensive knowledge and experience in policy, advocacy, human rights, and a strong commitment to inclusive aged care. She holds a master's degree in politics, international relations, and social administration. Sam is on the board of the International Federation of Ageing, chairs the DOHAC Diversity Consultative Committee, and is a distinguished member of the Australian Association of Gerontology. Her background is in health policy, human rights, and social justice. She is passionate about ensuring the voices of older people are heard and making diversity a core business in aged care. Please join me in welcoming Sam and the rest of the panel.
Great, thank you. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this room today. I also acknowledge these lands were never ceded. I'd just like to ask you to join me in welcoming our panel, online and on stage. So Pip Horseman, who is the General Manager, Customer Insights and Experience at My Home Care. Lexi Dennis, General Manager at Hazel Home Care. Stephen Beshi online, OAM, who's Chief Executive Officer of Apollo Care Alliance, and Tony Chirera, Co-Founder and CEO of Mabel. So Tony, starting with you. Older people are looking forward to an act that is rights-based, but we hear some providers are concerned about how to deliver care that's rights-based, and that's including things like choice and control. So what are your thoughts, and what do you think providers could do in preparation?
Thanks, Sam. So, look, from a Mabel perspective, so we were founded on the principles of dignity of choice. I think how to effectively provide choice and have a client deliver or have some rights over the care and services that they receive. So I think a lot of the statement of rights are centred around that ethos as a principle. I think the key question we grapple with is how do you facilitate choice and deliver that whilst also maintaining the obligations of the AP and balancing risk and really having some visibility about what's happening in the home in that kind of a model. And so that's a problem that our teams have really focused on. I think in terms of what providers can do around that concept of choice and election of choice, we've sort of taken the attitude to really partner with people since we started the company about 10 years and APs to try and facilitate that kind of outcome. I think some things providers, like leveraging platforms, it's not just about Mabel. I think the new Act enshrines digital platforms as part of the ecosystem. It's almost recognising that this is a pathway that providers can tap into to deliver choice. I think in the old world, the risk was always borne under the provider. I think in the new world, which we welcome, that risk is shared now because there are standards that a platform would need to adhere to. I think other elements around building a network on their own, I think some providers are going down that path. We've grappled with trying to curate a massive supply so that you can match increasingly divergent preferences. And this concept of risk, which I think we'll talk about a bit later, like how do you use technology to ensure that everyone that's associated with that participant has the visibility about what's happening in the home. And that's something we're spending a lot of investment to try and achieve. So they're workforce solutions as well, I think, are elements to that. I think other elements of the statement of rights around freedom from inhumane behaviour, neglect and abuse. I think some of the systems that we try and do to deliver that, to moderate behaviour around shift notes, getting that data, making sure we intervene and give the information back to the AP and the family members almost in real time to be able to act in the right way. So there's some thoughts I had around that question.
Fantastic. Lexi, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's, and Mr. Ian Yates talked about that this morning, that choice and control is nothing new. It's been around for a long time. I think where we're heading, which is a little bit new, is the fact that human rights, choice and control is enshrined in the legislation. On top of that, we're looking at a task force recommendation where there's co-contributions. And also the cohort of older people coming through at the moment who are engaging with our care and services. They are coming much more informed. They are already feeling quite empowered. So I think that kind of, triple element, I suppose, of choice and control is different than what we've seen in the past. And to me, what that all leads to is looking at value for money. So if people need to put their hand in their pocket and possibly contribute to the cost of some of their care and services, what do they really want? What do they really need? And then what does that mean for providers? I think for providers, it is about understanding your business really well. What is it? What are you seeing from a demand point of view for your care and services? And what types of care and services are delivering profit? We need that. And also, is it aligned then to your mission? I mean, I don't think we have to be everything to everyone. What can you do that you can deliver exceptionally well? And if you're not delivering everything to everyone, then look to partner with different services that might be able to fill your gaps. Yeah.
And I guess just to add to that, I think this idea that the Inspector General touched on about regulation, like is the government going to impose the regulation or is the industry going to respond? And we're seeing that on the disability side, where you had an approach to choice and control which was very liberal, and then now there's a process of, okay, how do we try and wrestle with that so that we can deliver outcomes? I think from a Mabel perspective, we're genuinely trying to, our margin is 16.5% out of every hour of care. But how do we moderate shifts? How we monitor and use large language models across incidents and things like that, so that we can ensure that when an AP is partnering with us, because that's what we would like to do, we're investing in that so that APs can come to the platform and feel safe in being able to deliver choice and control in a safeguarded marketplace. How can we use technology to try and drive some of those initiatives whilst trying to maintain as small a margin as possible is something that we're grappling with.
Some really great points. And sort of picking up on that point around wants and needs that you mentioned, Lexi, to Pip, are there limitations in the task force recommendations that could impact on managing services that older people want versus services older people need?
I think there's definitely a couple of limitations in there, and it's been touched on a bit this morning already around the assessment piece. So again, under the reforms, we're looking at 12-week block assessments in effect, where it would be revised, and they would be allocating, I guess, the services that the person has been identified as needing. But under the reforms, as Lexi just mentioned, the co-contribution piece is really going to play heavily into this space. So as I'm sure many of you know, they're looking at staging different levels of co-contribution based on the service. So for example, clinical would be pretty much fully funded, as what's been indicated, but some of those services in the middle, such as personal care, would mainly only be partially funded, and there will be a higher co-contribution. So I guess one of the challenges there is, and a lot of providers would see this today, is where someone might be assessed as needing personal care, but then when there is a need to pay for that, would the consumer actually see the value or want that service? We see this in CHISP today, where someone might be funded for DA and personal care, very happy to take the DA with a co-contribution, but probably less likely to take the personal care. And I suppose touching on what Ian was talking about, then the knock-on impact that might have on other health services.
Lexi, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just in regards to, I suppose, as providers, are we asking the right questions? We know we've been talking about engaging with our clients and our residents more and more, but again, you know, if you need to pay for something, will you want it? Will you pay for it? And then what does that mean from a business strategy point of view in regards to your care and services that you're looking to offer? Where does that investment then lead? But yeah, are we asking the right questions would be my thought into the future as what do you need? What would you like?
And I think playing back to that co-contribution element and the choice and control piece, if consumers are paying, they're going to want to have more choice and more control. And that really plays into the inclusions and exclusions as well. Yep. If I'm paying more for, say, DA, and I've got the support worker in my house, how do we manage that and manage that control over that service? We know consumer expectations are ever increasing, but the more you're contributing towards that service, the higher expectation you're likely to have, which is going to be really challenging to manage.
Yeah, certainly we're hearing that people are happy to pay co-contributions as long as it's for quality care. Yeah, so it's certainly out there. We've touched a little bit on some costs. So, Stephen, can you talk to the impact of the current funding on MM3-based services and then obviously out to MM5, MM6, and how the Taskforce recommendations could solve these issues?
Okay, thank you, and thanks. Great question there. If we go back in time, we look at the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission didn't say much in relation to the funding, and thus we had the task force come on the scene. The task force was primarily there to look at a fair and equitable approach to assessing means. It looked at funding contributions, and there were a whole bunch of recommendations, about 23 all up. That went to the government, and it looked at specific things like, you know, funding daily living needs and at full cost. It looked at accommodation and how you could possibly get away with covering the true costs of accommodation. And I've just finished a session with Stuart Brown about 1 hour ago to get the latest numbers, and it's really interesting. If you look at residential aged care in particular, and we look at regional, MMM3s, 4s, 5s, etc. There are only 3 sources of revenue in residential aged care. You've got your direct care costs, obviously with your ANAC, you've got your everyday living and your accommodation, and the numbers are fascinating. As of, and I'm looking at a piece of paper here, March 24, we look at the direct care results right now. Organisations across the board, this is both metro and regional, are making a surplus of about $15.13 per bed day, which I think when the care minutes increase overall, you find that number's going to drop, because obviously the government is paying for direct care and nothing more. You look at the everyday living, we've got a situation where providers are losing $5.62 a day per bed, and accommodation, the big loss is $10.16. So overall, providers across the board in all regions are losing 64 cents a day. It's not sustainable, it's not viable, full stop. They're the real numbers, you can't fluff around with it. So if they're your revenue streams, you've got to be able to cover off on those revenue streams. And the task force then went around trying to work out what you do in these areas to make it equitable so that the consumer gets the services they want. Really interesting. If we look at the direct care costs, we have agency costs in the city at about $11.31 a day, and none of this, by the way, is covered in ANAC. And we find in regional it's about $27 a resident a day, and in rural $32. So the moment you get agency inside a facility, you're in lost territory. And the government says that that's a provider problem. Well, in the bush, you don't have people. So you're going to be in a situation where unless you've got enough people living in the town, you could be in a lost situation right from the word go. So the recommendations out of the task force are good. What it will do is it will very firstly make facilities viable and sustainable, and that's the greatest good news story that comes out of this, let alone looking at what the additional things are that the resident wants. So if you sort of really look at it, it will provide viability and sustainability in regional towns, which is badly needed because we've got towns losing aged care facilities, which they don't want to lose. And I think ultimately, once we're very mature at this and we understand the true cost and the true revenues, if co-contribution does come in, we're going to find providers then being able to give, specifically in everyday living and accommodation, what it is that the customer wants. So in the bush, it'll be a case of big refurbs. In the city, it'll be the case of replacing old facilities with new facilities, you know, single en-suited with everything else. So it's a dire story right now, but I'd say that the task force recommendations will do nothing but help the entire sector.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Did anyone else have any comments they wanted to make to that? No? I'll pick up, so the task, obviously one of the, and we've touched on it a couple of times now, one of the main task force recommendations was around co-contributions. So just a question to everyone, what do you want to see happen in order for providers and for older people to be able to transition successfully over to the proposed co-contribution model? What do both sides, like consumers and providers, need to do?
I think I'll start, and I think it comes back to the education for the consumers and the broader sector in understanding, I guess, what they're doing and why we need to do this. And I guess also that assessment piece, we've talked about the wait times and the challenges in entry into the sector. So again, being able to turn it up or down around the assessed needs, and I think understanding as to why certain things are funded more than others for consumers is going to be really important. And I think the other thing is some strong guidance around the capping of services will also really support that in terms of being able to manage that transition for new customers entering into this.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, it's about health literacy of the older person as they're coming in and engaging with care and services. They need to understand, well, what is the value in some of the things that we are delivering? If you think about someone, perhaps they might engage with a Mabel worker, someone, what is more important to that person? Is it being able to speak the same language? Is it being from the same religion or cultural background? Or is it having a certificate for? And where is the value in those different things? Because, of course, the older person will vote with their feet, and they will choose the types of people that they want to, bring into their lives to assist them live their best life. But, we also need to know that there are informal supports out there as well. So it's going to look different for every single person that comes across our businesses. And then I think for providers, it's about really knowing your business and what you are trying to, effectively sell. And there's a responsibility on the provider to, educate the older person as they're coming through. Well, where is the value in a certificate for, as opposed to someone who perhaps is not as well qualified. And then in, the new legislation of positive risk taking, how is it then that we, support older people to make an informed best practice decision into the types of care and services that they would like to engage with?
Stephen,
I think education is fundamental, and it includes the provider educating the greater community. I mean, How often do I hear that you're taking, a payment, my parents are paying $500,000 to go into aged care. Well, no, they're actually not, because the estate is getting it back. So it's not lost. And as soon as you explain to the residents and residents' family the real story about what is really going, they accept it. And they're very, very willing to contribute to, the things other than direct care for their loved ones. So there's a big education process, including the media actually beginning to speak the real truth about the true costs and what it's being paid for.
And just quickly, and perhaps there's an opportunity for the government too to take on some of that education piece out to the wider community, and so it is not just all on providers.
Great. Just as we're sort of coming up towards the end, so we've got a few minutes for questions at the end. There's an increasing reliance on technology to improve service delivery and processes, but there's obviously still compliance and governance oversights needed. So what do you think providers need to consider in addressing this? And I'll start with Lexi.
I love a good automation. I love a bit of AI. I think it's really exciting. Every time you turn your computer on, there's a new AI functionality coming in, with all of your different software systems that you have in place. And it's exciting, but it's also getting quite complex and confusing to keep up with all of the new innovations, which is, it's brilliant. There's a lot of value in it and we need it. I think the difficulty sometimes is that there is, silos within organisations between information technology and then quality and governance. And it's really important that there's an intersection between those two different teams, and smaller providers who might not have a chief information officer. It's important for key people within the organisation to have a really good understanding of what is happening in that technology space. We can't just rely on risk algorithms to be running through our systems to be picking up some of the issues. We need to be able to understand what it is. How are we making sure that risk is averted? What kind of interventions are we putting in place to make sure that the people that we are caring for are looked after? And it is about partnering with different types of providers and not just handing that responsibility over to them. It's about also understanding what interventions and risk mitigation strategies they have in place, along with the AI and the automations.
Yeah, and I guess just to add to that, there is a lot of hype around AI, and really, from a Mabel perspective, we're trying to work out pragmatically where's the value in the particular system or solution, and is it going to deliver impact either to the customer or to the company? And where we've sort of landed around that, it is around risk. So some of the things, for example, that we do that people might find interesting is, so we have a sister company called Homemade, which is an approved provider. And we're using learnings from that to create tools that we can offer to other providers. So, for example, one simple thing might be, every shift worker on Mabel does a 150-character shift note. We run moderation with a large language model on that. We report that back to Homemade by exception. And they use that information goes to that clinical team to look at care deterioration, incidents. So I guess to your point, it's really about using technology so that we're arming the human in the mix, or the person that's really got the risk, so that they can manage their time efficiently and really have ensure that all the quality outcomes that they need to achieve are being delivered. I think other elements that we see is also closing the loop around the care plan. So, for example, we can track back the shift. Was it related to the care plan? Was it goal met? And again, technology can play a part in arming the support partner with data that they may not be able to get across. And I think things like that go to affordability, they go to efficiency, and as we become increasingly focused around the huge cost of aged care, I think it's incumbent on us to try and work out, well, how can we drive affordability and efficiency whilst maintaining some of the principles that we're all sort of adhered to? There's some thoughts around that.
And I think the only other thing
It's
I
great.
would... Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So the only other thing I would add is around the challenges we know with digital literacy, both among the workforce and the consumer. But I think it's also about empowering the consumers, especially in home care, to also feed into this. I think shift notes, we've got the automation and things like that to run through, but actually on that education piece with the customer, like what should they be telling us or not telling us, and how they engage with us more so than the workforce, I think is where we need to look to.
Great. Stephen?
Yeah, just we're an organisation that doesn't have a head office, even though it's a residential aged care. So we're spending a heck of a lot of money on IT. IT is not cheap. It is very expensive to have a proper architecture in place where you're going to make certain that you're not cyber attacked, for example. But you can roll in applications, and if they don't work, you can cut them out, write an API and roll in another application very easy. So you can get your applications that are modern, up to speed, that with icons, where even if your staff aren't literate, they can still use the software and at the bedside to be able to do the care planning, etc., very quickly. At the end of the day, it is a modern world. You can't get away from this. Technology is an enabler and it's going to continue. So organisations are going to have to work out how you cost it and provide it, because it's not only the providers that need it, but all the clients, all the residents. They are becoming tech savvy. They know how to use this stuff, and you should be providing it to them as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for a great conversation. I think we've got a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. If anyone has any questions for the panel. So it's hard to see. No? Okay, well, obviously provided all the information. So thank you so much to every member of the panel, to Pip, to Lexi, to Stephen and to Tony. Thank you.
Thank you.